1 in 6 older adults experiences elder abuse in community settings. 1 in 6. Abuse. 1 in 6. Today we're talking about a minority group which is not alone not in power, but also they're marginalized. They're not accommodated in day-to-day life, they're economically precarious, socially isolated, and often forgotten about or dismissed. We're talking about boomers! Boomers, 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 I'm Neil, and you're watching The Liberal Cook. It's a pun. Today we're talking about ageism, a social bias against people because of their age. And while there are serious ageist beliefs about young people, oh no, it's Generation Z/Alpha, they love unironic truth and bad quality audio and sudden abrupt editing, and what's a Pete Davidson? I'm so confused. I'm gonna go on mumsnet.com. Greta Thunberg, give me tummy ache. Anyway, today we're actually going to talk about older adults, the preferred term for people who are older adults. We're talking about ageism in older adults, defined by Robert Butler, who noted that, among other features, it's a deep-seated uneasiness on the part of the young and middle-aged, a personal revulsion to and distaste for growing old, disease, and disability. So right now, ageism affects the silent generation and boomers. And I'm hoping to convince you that, while some members of those groups certainly have had the reins of power and have abused them terribly, not many, that's how hierarchies work, the majority of people in these groups have been as disenfranchised as any of the rest of us. And they're not a monolith. They're women, they're queer, they're black, they're indigenous, they're disabled, they're intersectional. And now, as they get older, they are increasingly losing not just political and social power, but autonomy and security. And if we really are the leftists we think we are, committed to creating a coalition of the disenfranchised to overthrow oppressive hierarchies, then not only do we have to join with older adults, but we need to make an effort to safeguard them. And we don't necessarily have unlimited time to figure it out. Let's make a stew! I mean, we are the leftists we say we are, right? We're not just saying stuff on Twitter, are we? This isn't just me, a millennial, saying things for attention and money, is it? Well, just in case, I'm also going to have a chat with people who are older than me, and we're going to see if we can figure this out together, through dialogue and listening. And as if that wasn't enough, I am going to make an Irish stew, just like my mother's recipe, kind of, except now it's vegan. And it's gonna have Guinness in it and spuds. So if you'll forgive me, I'm gonna make some assumptions about you now. 1, you are on the left side of the political spectrum, though you're welcome here if you're not. Sorry about the makeup and everything. I'm a miserable piece of non-binary candy. 2, you likely believe that there is systemic injustice created and reified by our current climate, and we need to deconstruct these systems on both individual and systemic issues, right? And because this is YouTube, you're likely either middle-aged or young. So I'm going to talk to you as if this is true, but please keep watching if you're not. Boomers, boomers. But okay, because I assume you're young and social justice-oriented leftists, I'm going to take for granted that you care about being intersectional, that you care about addressing power imbalances and helping those who are marginalized. You care so much, don't you? You care about me almost slicing my fingers off with every single shot. So my job is easy here. I don't have to convince you that we need to address marginalization, that's a given. But I do have to convince you that older adults are actually marginalized and that ageism against them is a form of bigotry. And that's going to mean that this section is going to be full of some upsetting facts. Ageism refers to the stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination directed towards people on the basis of their age. We start absorbing these attitudes in childhood and have them reinforced. It's a socially acceptable form of bigotry, with age-related bias seen as humorous or harmless. Get off the damn lawn! Oh, look at me! I have a darn lawn! Globally, half of all people are ageist against older adults, and this has real consequences. We see an association between ageism, poor physical and mental health, cognitive decline, and shorter lifespan. Ageism reduces older people's quality of life, increases their social isolation and loneliness, both of which are associated with serious health problems, restricts their ability to express their sexuality, and may increase the risk of violence and abuse against older people. A few different papers have posited that somebody's personal anxiety around aging and dying increases the likelihood of them holding ageist beliefs. The equation of aging with decline and frailty justifies limiting the autonomy and authority of older adults. They are marginalised in the labour market, making it more difficult for them to support themselves in, a capitalist system where they have to.
For now.
Those who live in places with governmental benefits can be stigmatised for taking them. People are less willing to listen to them, and they're at risk of losing the ability to make decisions about their bodies. Often, their adulthood is stripped, and they have a decreased ability to be heard or to influence the conditions under which they live. But those are all just inevitable parts of aging, right? They ought to man up and deal with reality. See, I'm doing the thing that we accuse boomers of doing, because when it comes to the inevitability of aging, that's what we do. This is a turnip. Despite the narrative that they're the rich generation, older adults are often in financially precarious positions, with many living under the poverty line. Retirement is less of a given and more of an aspiration. As one study noted, it may be true to say that the traditional notion of retirement is now aspired to only by the working class. The reality for most of these lower income earners is worry about how they will fund their retirement, and this is leading them to delay retirement. Financial precarity is not unique to those under 30. This is footage from a famous eviction near Strokestown in County Roscommon, where 3 siblings in their 50s were evicted from their home while the Gardaí, the local police force, watched. For those that actually manage to get to retirement, they're still often precarious. While they may have acquired money, it is often finite, and they can't afford to take the risks that the rest of us can take without losing payment acquired after a lifetime of work and risking destitution. To put it simply, the rest of us can, in theory, rebuild and bounce back, at least as much as anyone can build wealth in the current climate, but older adults really have no chance. They've already bounced as high as they can bounce. I should probably parboil my potatoes. Elder abuse is incredibly common. According to a meta-analysis spanning studies from all over the world, 1 in 6 older adults experience elder abuse in community settings. And it's likely more common in institutional settings where, according to another systematic review, about 64% of staff members report abusing an older adult within the last year. Elder abuse includes emotional abuse, blocking the adult from doing things they're capable of doing, threats of abandonment, preventing contact, humiliation, verbal abuse, and withdrawal from support networks. Financial abuse, including theft, exploitation, fraud, misappropriation of possessions, etc. And physical abuse, such as withholding medication, taking away mobility aids, threats of harm, physical assault, and sexual assault. Older adults can be susceptible to this problem because of cognitive impairments like dementia, but they're also at risk because of social isolation. If you want to exploit someone or abuse them, isolate them, make them feel like shit about themselves, and make sure no one listens to them. Mental health issues are common in older adults as well, like depression and dementia. Over 20% of adults above the age of 60 suffer from a mental or neurological disorder. Impairment in mental health in older adults has been linked to poverty, social issues, loss of independence, and loneliness. In cities where dependence on personal cars is high, such as those in the United States, driving cessation is one of the strongest predictors of an onset of depression in the elderly. As noted by Greenberg, age does not obviate the desire or necessity to go shopping, see the doctor, visit friends, and undertake other everyday activities. Self-harm in older adults is not uncommon, with a recent systematic review placing the rate of self-harm or suicide attempts at between 19 to 65 per 100,000 people. The same paper found that common risk factors for self-harm included loss of control, loneliness, and isolation, and their having aged being perceived as burdensome. And while cognitive decline is not inevitable, things are even bleaker for those who suffer it. And the thing is, we could help if we wanted to. We can design community spaces to be friendlier to older adults with cognitive impairments, but often choose not to. We know, for example, that environments fostering physical activity are protective against dementia and depression. And we know that older adults face barriers to avail of physical activity. For example, installing frequent benches and public bathrooms makes a community more accessible for older adults with or without dementia. Hostile architecture strikes again. Well, we couldn't have this marginalised group loitering, and we couldn't have this marginalised group sleeping, and we certainly couldn't have old people sitting down. I want to build another Forever 21. You see, often instead, we put welfare of impaired older adults in the hands of institutional power, taking them from their homes and community and taking away the last of their autonomy for the rest of their lives. Anyone familiar with general mental health discourse will have encountered the ethical dilemma about the extent to which we should be comfortable stripping the rights to self-determination from those who we deem impaired. But it doesn't seem as if we have quite as much of a debate when it comes to older people, with some societies treating the institutionalization of older adults as normal or inevitable, because social issues only exist in as much as they can be traded as commodities. Granted, I accept that while many people involved in elder care institutions are kind people, trying to make this process as smooth as possible. Plus, in some cases, that's preferable to the alternative, like leaving an older adult alone. Still, I can think of few things more scary and miserable than inevitable institutionalization being the best that the moderately well-off can hope for, while, like with every other form of privatization, the poor can go hang. To pull ourselves out of our Western lens for a moment, older adults across the globe can face even more challenging circumstances, like war, famine, natural disasters, occupation. This Rohingya woman became a refugee at 100 years old. People in Yemen of all ages are facing devastating famine. There are older adults in Gaza, in Burkina Faso, and in Syria. The issues facing older adults are more complex than just poverty. When you add an intersectional lens to analyze this cohort of older adults, things become more bleak and depressing. Older adults are not a monolith. They are different races, have different needs. Some are queer, or black, or immigrants, or trans, or disabled, or any combination thereof. And this impacts the bias against older adults on any given point. Like poverty. Poverty rates being much higher for women than men, and higher for racial and ethnic minorities. Or you have discrimination, something all older adults face because of their age, but which varies in intensity and character based on their other vulnerabilities. But that's not boomers though, that's old people. I mean, that's different. That's a different panel in the comic book of life, no? Well, I'm afraid it is boomers. Being lonely? At a time like this? Isolated, mental health issues, physical health issues? That's boomers. Every day, more and more. Dementia, institutionalization. It's our parents. The person you're arguing with on Facebook, the people in your town, that's boomers. All right, let's put in our potatoes into our stew. We're going to throw in a stock cube. We're going to get some boiling water in here. And a pint of Guinness. Oh, some MSG as well. Traditional Irish MSG. And one other thing is the seitan, in this case mock duck seitan. You can make this yourself. We actually did a recipe for this in our episode Capitalism and the Body, or you can forget to do that the night before like I did and then just get it from a shop. But it's okay because there it is, there it is, there it is. A little sprig of rosemary or 4 and a can of Guinness, which I only get 1 take at. Nice. I only bought 1 can. Anyway, I think it's pretty clear. We shouldn't discriminate against older adults. We should, in our organization, make sure not to dismiss their concerns or neglect their needs. We recognize their humanity and we can be better to everyone than everyone has been to everyone up until now. Otherwise, 1, net misery. It's not good. 2, everybody should have to pay college fees. I get to pay mine and I had to work my whole life before retiring on a pittance and ending up in a home. You're going to pay even more college fees and work for even longer, retire on even less, and end up in an even more expensive home. Enough. We should be helping everyone right now. Silly shit. Do more silly shit, Neil. Silly shit, and then we learn some more, and then some more silly shit. Oh, I'm such a fucking goofball. Older adults are marginalised, but bluntly, is this our fault? Like, here are all the ways that older adults are marginalised, and meanwhile, the media is trying to convince us that the real issue facing elder adults is us snarkily saying, "Okay, boomer."
Okay.
Okay, boomer. Okay, boomer. Okay. An analysis of tweets relating to the term "okay, boomer" revealed that the top 30 influencers who tweeted "okay, boomer" were politicians and media figures like Trump, CNN, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Pete Buttigieg, Newsweek, and the Washington Post. While the sentiment was seen as grassroots, the media and political establishment latched onto it, often to post evidence of a culture war. This feels, it's funny. Because millennials and Gen Z do have a lot of reason to be angry. Like, And many of us are in a unique position. With the fall of the Berlin Wall and the USSR, we grew up during the period declared the end of history. The assumption was that with communism defeated, the world would exclusively be made of liberal market capitalist countries, or put it another way, we had entered the phase of capitalist realism, where capitalism is taken not just as the best system, but has become so ubiquitous that we can't even imagine an alternative one. Yeah, it's different. For these generations, millennials and zoomers, we're the generations who've experienced capitalism at its most inescapable. And to be steeped in neoliberal capitalism in this way is a quantifiably different experience than for other generations. These issues are systemic, and yes, we are completely allowed to be angry at the people who've created this environment, but I would argue, if you'll let me, that the people who are primarily responsible for creating and perpetuating all of this are not older adults, they're the elite. They're the people in power. And sure, some of them might be boomers, but that's not much of a relevant factor. For the boomers in power, it's not their boomerness that made them sell us out. It's their personal greed, their power, and their willingness to use any tools under imperialism to gain more. Or as my 11-year-old daughter put it shouldn't really be "okay, boomer." It should be
"okay, capitalist."
And I genuinely don't know if this is intentional. It doesn't matter, honestly. If a group of capitalists were sitting in a room thinking, let's scapegoat older adults to get the heat off of us. Murdoch, you blasted all over the editorials. Trump, you send a few semi-coherent angry tweets. CNN, go on and put a both sides narrative I don't think many of these social phenomena are based on overt conspiracy. I think they have more to do with the fact that anything taking focus away from people in power helps them. But more on that in a later episode. The point is, we have to be careful not to fall into this trap, because it's not just morally imperative that we include older adults in our plans for the future. It's strategically stupid not to. We're not at war. This generational conflict narrative is manufactured. We are seeing anger at boomers magnified on our side, and their side is getting the narrative that we're lazy hipsters who sit around eating too much avocado and playing the mandolin. Quick confession, guys. Fuck avocados. Fuck them. Sure, guacamole, fine, but who cares? Sorry. In reality, it's class and access and hierarchy which account for our marginalization. We have far more in common with the average boomer than we do with the 1%ers of our own generation. I have more in common with people of whatever age who've been scared about whether they'll make rent or have had to put off going to the dentist because their kid needs a new school uniform than I do with Mark Zuckerberg, even though he and I probably both, watched SpongeBob in our teens and could sing together like F is for friends who do stuff together. Shut the fuck up, Mark. Shut the fuck up, Mark. You don't get to sing with me. Enjoy the metaverse, you cunt. Can we have an episode with the word cunt in it? And besides, this sort of conflict isn't helpful because it doesn't deal with the fabric of reality that we live in now. Part of the okay boomer class conflict narrative is a bitterness we have at not getting the things our parents and grandparents told us to get. You should be familiar with this. Go to college and you'll get a good job. Pay your dues and you'll move up in the workplace. Delay having children until you have the money to have them, because someday you definitely will. Follow the rules and you'll prosper. And it's so tempting to look back at that time and be nostalgic. Look, back then you were able to support a family on one income, or look at the time when a college degree guaranteed a living wage. But frankly, this mindset is bullshit. It's the antithesis of intersectional, it's limiting our demands, and it's in conflict with the material reality of climate catastrophe. What point in history can we go back to where sexism, patriarchy, or racism weren't disenfranchising whole swathes of the population? No. We can't break out of this by thinking about an imagined capitalist utopian past. We need to break free of capitalism in general. Capitalism isn't inevitable or inescapable. We must cultivate a future-oriented political movement, not get lost in bitterness. As a brilliant paper by Mueller and McCullum puts it, this would require cultivating a positive, forward-looking political imaginary that endows subjects with a coherent framework from which they could theoretically plan out the changes they wish to see and the pathways to achieve them. Without this effort, the outcome may be political or cultural stagnation. Or worse, within the US political system, Trumpism not only represents an emergent form of postmodern conservatism, but provided a convenient sense of enjoyment for the resistance to Trump, whose identities were often articulated through a form of glib contrarianism. For example, supporting anyone but Trump, devoid of a coherent and forward-looking agenda for widespread social change and equity. This is class warfare, not generational warfare. It isn't the boomers as a class who are responsible for our miserable lot, just like it isn't our fault that boomers are in a precarious position. But in attempting to liberate ourselves, we have the potential to liberate them too. Are you lonely during this pandemic? Have there been swathes of isolation? Are you living one right now? Did it help being tech savvy? Having Twitter, having Zoom, having a parasocial relationship with a cute non-binary YouTuber with a cheeky dimply smile? Fuck loneliness. Loneliness sucks. Being at a remove from people sucks. Something that really bothers me in my personal life is not being seen or understood or listened to. Being misinterpreted, having people dismiss what I have to say or judge me by my appearance, all that kind of thing. So I think I'm probably going to handle that aspect of aging really badly. And it might be wise for me to start learning to laugh at myself now before I become a joke more often than I'm seen as an agent in the world. And the older I get, I'm 32, guys. To some of you, I'm like a baby person. And to others, I'm irretrievably embarrassing and out of touch. But the older I get, the lonelier I become. I used to have loads of friends. Back when I was on Facebook, so many friends. Who are all these people? And then years would go by and it's like, who are you people? And more years go by and it's like, I don't know these people. And then you come out as queer and poly and all these people are like, I don't know Neil. And you watch people emigrate and they're all lonely off across the planet and the stay-behinds like me are all lonely here. Well, I just feel like it's going to keep getting lonelier and lonelier. And here's the big bombshell of the essay. I'm sure no one's made this argument before. Loneliness is bad for your mental health. Well, I mean, quite seriously, it's linked to increased risks of both common and severe mental health disorders, from depression to schizophrenia. It's funny, we tend to think of aging as intrinsically tied to unpleasant disorders and dysfunctions, but, when we treat a group really badly, how can we tell what's a natural deterioration in functioning versus one that is, well, not so much nurture as it is lack of nurture? But there's good news in terms of loneliness and isolation in older adults. A systematic review of 286 studies showed a connection between mental well-being and relationships, finding that the quality of relationships mattered more than the quantity of relationships. So none of our isolation or loneliness is hopeless at all. This is about the quality of the relationships. So many of the changes we're fighting for with capitalism are such big systemic changes that individuals can't do much on our own. But one answer here is just cultivate relationships with older adults in your area. And obviously that isn't enough, but it is a real tangible thing that you can do. Because older people are cool? My dad's cool. He can build motorcycles. He used to drive around on a motorbike with me in a sidecar and it had a big red communist star painted on it. He plays the banjo. And as generations get older, they often get more diverse, which makes sense. Right now, my daughter, the one who coined the phrase,
Okay, capitalist.
her generation are probably pretty cohesive. They're all living through the pandemic and they have TikTok and there are hegemonic things going on there. But as they get older, their life experiences and their emergent identities will push them further from each other. They'll become increasingly diverse the older they get. And that won't really become static at any point. There's a really cool study that asks people how much they think they've changed over the last 10 years and how much they expect to change over the next 10. You could take a moment to ask yourself right now.
You could take a moment to ask yourself right now.
The study of more than 19,000 people, some of whom were quite young in their 20s or teens, some of whom were middle-aged, and some of whom were really quite old in their very late 60s, they all reported a huge amount of change in the last 10 years, but expected very little change in the years to come. People, it seems, regard the present as a watershed moment at which they have finally become the person they will be for the rest of their lives. Imagine that you could change as much as you did from 20 to 30 when you go from 50 to 60. If you're a person who's prone to change, like me, that's very exciting and kind of frightening in a cool way. But the world changes so much, of course people change. Recently, I watched some of the Michael Palin travel documentaries from the late 80s and early 90s, and he crosses out of the Soviet Union as it's collapsing. He meets a tour guide dressed as Lenin. It's such a fascinating privilege of a lens to peer through into an alternate universe of weird haircuts and diversity and naivety and horror and possibility, and I highly, highly recommend you go talk to a person who actually lived through it all as an adult. Go talk to them. Go talk to one. It's not hard. They're all around us. Well, it is hard, actually. Connecting with older generations. Almost lonely. For our generation too, sort of frustrating, alienating, depressing. Do you know what I mean? Trying to reach that cohort. Look, I know I'm being a hypocrite. I should go talk to an older person, not just tell you to do it. I should go talk to Sarah's dad. Hi, Paul.
Hi.
How you doing?
I'm doing great.
We're gonna just have a chat. This is Paul. It's Sarah's dad, otherwise known as Sarah's dad.
Yes.
And
Yes.
there might be a
And
little
other things.
and other things. Okay, so like, what year were you born?
I was born in 1944, the day before D-Day.
So
Actually, it was D-Day, I think.
it was in or around then anyway.
I think day before.
Different
D-Day.
time zone anyway. What was that like? I mean, what was the world like?
Well, I came from a very blue-collar neighborhood, and well, it's pretty simple. I mean, first 10 years of my life, I wasn't paying attention much about what was going on, so it was pretty simple.
Yeah.
I just went to school and played in the summertime and went back to school.
Okay, yeah. I suppose if somebody asked me about the 90s, then I would say something similar. You know,
Yeah.
The things you take for granted, you go to school and you
Yeah,
play.
I wasn't a very deep thinker when I was young.
Okay.
Nor am I now, for that matter. But-
Oh, okay. We're possibly interviewing the wrong person.
Right, maybe.
44, so you're 77 now.
Yes.
Right. So how would you perceive the world differently? Let's say at like 17 versus
Okay.
now at 77.
You worry more, at my age, you worry about what's going to happen in the future for your children. What are we leaving?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that sense of sort of paternal responsibility.
You know, all the things that are going wrong with the environment and everything, I was a part of that. So we're leaving those problems to a future generation and basically nothing to do with it, or very little to do with the problems that.
Well, I suppose I want to ask you, do you feel guilty? Like guilty about climate catastrophe? Because as you say, it wasn't willingly, it wasn't knowingly.
I feel guilty in the sense of why didn't we figure it out earlier?
Yeah.
You know, why were we oblivious to this? We should be able to figure it out sooner than we did.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been a topic of discussion for 34 years now, and it really hasn't got that much better.
Which I would describe that as political frustration. So do you sort of feel like you're shouldering an amount of political frustration?
Sure. Obviously the politicians are making all the calls. If you're living in a democracy, or sort of a democracy, you have a responsibility to put the right people in office, and that's not always happening, and it gets very, very complicated, especially in the American system where basically if you're running for office, funds are very important, and if you start saying the wrong things, the funds are going to dry up. So
the shorthand in having a conversation with boomers or older, or even some Gen Xers, is, oh, you're all political centrists. Maybe you're left leaning, but you're political centrists. And I feel like maybe sometimes that's like deeply unfair. You probably wouldn't consider yourself a centrist.
No, I'm a left leaning,
Yeah.
so to speak. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say radical left, but pretty close. I mean, pretty close. I've attended, various protests and things like that, and the issues that I protested. The gentleman who got killed by the cop, and
The BLM protest last year.
Sure, and I protested the Vietnam War. I burned my giraffe card. I mean.
Okay.
So yeah, left leaning, and I wouldn't say I'm active because I don't do that much now.
Right.
But I have in the past, and that's where I feel comfortable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you burned your draft card, and you participated in the BLM protests in 2020.
Yeah.
So definitely
During COVID.
During COVID.
Yeah.
At 76.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but I always like to say, and this is probably off topic, but my father, who was born in 1902, he went from horse and carriage, not horseback, horse and carriage,
Right.
to do work, and saw man land on the moon. You know, I mean, that, I don't know that there's any other time period that's dramatic of a change.
Yeah. I mean, that's extraordinary. Yeah, to have witnessed that with one's senses in real time.
One lifespan, you know.
Yeah, one lifespan. So I wanted to ask you as well about how old would you have been in 81, 82?
I'm counting, I can't do that.
Which is another. Well, I think you would have been in your late 30s, right?
Yes.
Yes. And that was the AIDS epidemic.
Yes.
And so, you know, a lot of my audience are queer people and people who are standing on the shoulders of Stonewall, and you know, but you were there, right? You
I was there. I got involved with the gay community when I was pretty young, and not for all the right reasons. There, I wound up working in retail and made some gay friends.
Right.
Then there was a bar in Camden, New Jersey that served minors. I was 19 at the time. So it was a gay bar, so I was hanging out in the gay bar. I had quite a few gay friends. In fact, my business partner in music was gay.
Okay, yeah.
And he died from AIDS.
Okay. In that kind of time period.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. In fact, I was married. We sort of drifted apart because, first of all, I moved to Colorado. He was still in Philadelphia, where we were from Philadelphia area. And we talked once in a while, but, you know, it's distance. There was no internet. There was no, I mean, when we going to write him or call him every day? No, but we kept in contact, and suddenly I lost contact with him. And I didn't, tried to find him, phone number didn't work. Finally, somebody told me that he had died. One of my band members had called me and said, he's passed away. And his partner passed away at the same time.
Christ. Yeah.
I knew quite a few people who died from AIDS.
So that's a whole community. That's a whole friend group.
That was just awful. I could cry at musicals, but it's hard for me to cry in a theater. And I saw the Freddie Mercury film.
Right.
It broke me up because all I could think of is, oh God, all these people have died. That's something that if the right people had invested money in quicker.
Yes. Yeah. And hadn't scapegoated.
Yeah.
That whole community.
Reagan was not interested in saving gay people.
No, I can't imagine, based on the rest of our conversation, that you were particularly a fan of Ronald Reagan.
No.
or Mrs. Thatcher. It's funny, getting older, having kids, and even as a non-binary Saurus, feeling like you're turning into your dad, or somebody's dad, somebody's parent, and it feels like there's something very embarrassingly human about our attitudes to older people. I feel personally a kind of discomfort around authority. Surprise, surprise. And I see authority itself, power, quite out of everyone's hands. It's only a costume you put on when you're dealing with other people. No one really has any power around here. So I should talk to older people. I don't know why we make such a big deal out of it. They're like people. They're people. I think they just have a tremendous amount of power in the mythology of our brains. It's not funny. We're the powerful ones. Just as much as they are. So, grow up. Hi, Dad. How you doing?
Hey, Over. How are you, dude?
I'm pretty good. We can pretend that that's us actually saying hello when we've actually been faffing around for the last 10 minutes.
Getting the technical side of the thing sorted, yeah. Yeah, good. Completely spontaneous. So.
When we talk about socialism, did your politics inform your life, or was it just just being sound to be a socialist at that point in history.
I was too busy trying to put food on the table for you and your sister.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
when I was a younger man. But even prior to that, no, I never had any great interest in politics. I really hadn't, you know. But if you're a good person, if you're a decent person, of course you're a socialist. You know, we look after our vulnerable, don't we? You know, we you know, unless you're an absolute monster. But I think growing up, when I did in the late 1960s, early 70s, when I was a child or whatever, you know, I was born in 1962, but it was just a thing. You looked after people. You know, there was no talk of socialism, capitalism, whatever. You know, it was just a thing you did. You looked after the vulnerable.
And do you think that we've stepped away from that a little bit?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. You know, and I think slowly but surely, I think people's rights are being taken away. You know, I think very, very slowly, and you have to understand these are rights hard won by. You know, these are this is blood on the streets that won us these rights. You know that there had to be 2 world wars before there was a welfare state. You know, before that, you know, you go out to fight a war and absolutely full marks for burning your draft cards, you know, because you would have to go out and fight two world wars to make rich people richer. And, you know, guys were coming home in 1980, and guys were coming home in 1945, or the Vietnam War in the early 70s, coming back from that to a country that really didn't care. Really did not care, you know, that they would give you a pittance of a pension, say, right, well that's it, off you go, you know, while there was vast sums of money being made off the backs of people who did the actual work, you know. I know that sounds like Trotsky, but that's basically the way it was. These rights were very, very hard fought for. These were very, very hard fought for, you know, and you know, historically, the working man, you know, working people have been, you know, downtrodden, as it were. And it's only quite recent that we've had this standard of living, you know, and it was hard, but it's being taken away from us slowly but surely in increments, very, very small increments, so small that you don't even notice,
yes,
you know, till it affects you.
Yes.
You know, till you need to, you know, you go down to the shop and find that your dollar, your euro, your pound doesn't really buy what it used to, you know. So, you know, I think these days that you know, I think we're being put back in our place very slowly, but very surely being put back in our place. You know, the peasants. And it's a bit disturbing. It's a bit worrying. It really is, you know.
Do you ever have that sense that, like, from your parents' generation or from the generation older than you, when you were young, that they were kind of looking at you and going, like, they were actively providing a better life for you than they had?
Well, I think that's a natural progression, isn't it? I think every generation wants their progeny to be, you know, have it better than they did, you know. I just think that's a natural progression.
This generation war where millennials are sort of raging at boomers for holding on to wealth is not very true. That actually the 1% of the 5% that are holding on to all the wealth are like cross-generational. And they're Gen Xers now, they're millennials now, you know.
No, I was just going to say it's a very interesting point, because, you know, greed has always been with us, you know, and greed always will be. There's very little you can do about that. But I do remember there was a compassion. There was a compassion in this country. I was just talking about this very subject to an elderly neighbour of mine across the road. He's 78. He remembers growing up in Dublin, where you could walk down the road and within maybe 2-3 miles you could find a hospital, and you could go in and you would be treated and you would be sent home, and you would be seen within perhaps an hour or two. Now, what happened was, during the 1970s, it was discovered that these services were costing too much. they weren't costing me too much. They weren't costing you too much. What they were doing was cutting into these enormous profits that these people, our people in power, were making. So they simply closed them down as a consequence of that. My lady inside spent 2 days, 48 hours waiting to see a doctor with sepsis. Our life is better. Then we have cars, we have big fancy TVs, we have Nike runners, we have all the trappings of money, as it were.
Yeah.
You know, but no quality really of life. You know, no security as such.
Yes.
You know, we have houses that we can't afford. We have mortgages that my grandchildren will be paying off. There are old people freezing to death. There are the infirmed. There are, people on waiting lists for 2 years for a pretty routine medical procedure, and that's where we've gotten us into. And the trade-off for that is that we get to drive around in Nissan Qashqais. We get to, we have wonderful motorways, all this, and it's a trade-off. I don't think it's a good one. I think we'd be seduced by this. We can all live the lifestyle of the rich and famous that we see in Hollywood movies, that we all see on American TV. We've been seduced into that, Comes at a price. Nothing comes for nothing, It comes at a price. And if we are willing to neglect our old and our vulnerable, if you're willing to, are infirm, people who are people with disabilities, if we're willing to do that, well, I don't think it's a good trade-off. I don't do it. I really don't,
No, I fully agree. And that's going to make the edit. Something along those lines. It's funny, you were, when you were talking earlier on about like not really, not engaging with politics with a small p, like theory or whatever. And then between sort of saying like we just have a basic duty to look after each other. We don't need the trappings, and there's always an economic trade-off. It's like, well, you're basic. That's just Lenin, like you're just Lenin.
Yeah.
Oh, Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer had a very shiny nose, and if you ever saw it, you would even say it glows. All of the other reindeer used to laugh and call him name. Pinocchio. They never let poor Rudolph join in any reindeer games. Then one frosty Christmas Eve, Santa came to say, Rudolph, with your nose so bright, won't you drive my sleigh tonight? Then all the reindeer loved him, and they shouted out with glee, be Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer, you'll get history. Right. Jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride on a one-horse open sleigh. Oh, jingle bells, jingle.
Thank you all so much, and a special thanks to patrons A Tasty Snack, Floof Pants, and Hristo Kolev. Thanks everyone for being so patient with the video coming out. Thanks to my dad, and to Sarah's dad. And a big thanks this month to Atom Fellows of the Anarchy Funhouse for helping us get
You're
this
very
video.
welcome. Because everybody here at the Anarchy Funhouse believes all us
know,
YouTubers have to work together in solidarity if we're gonna change. Neil? Neil, can you hear me? Neil? Help!
Who are you?
I am the editor.
What did you do with Atom? What do you want?
Never mind him, but you, Neil, are getting too close to the truth. Yes, and for your sake and the sake of the platform, let it